Hello, and my name is Hakon, and welcome back to another little tutorial on the Empress Effects Zoia, the modular patchable synthesizer in a nice little box. You may notice that there's something new going on over here, and that is because since my last tutorial, I've had to, well, I haven't had to, but I wanted to install a new shift button when my shift button on the panel here started not working reliably all the time. I made a little hack. I've made a few videos about that. I'll make a little link for those up here. First one, and I'm not sure how long that stays there for, and then I'll put a link to the other one as well. Now, that's out of the way. That's now my shift button. Today's patch is something that I'm not really intending on using musically, or I wasn't certainly, but it was a challenge to myself. I wanted to see if I could do this. I got the idea when I saw how the it's Arturia Microfreak worked. It had a capacitive touch sensitive keyboard, and the way the capacitive touch sensitivity works is that the larger an area your finger covers, that acts as a modulation source for the sound. And I thought, well, that sounds like a fun thing to do with the Zoia. So the principle here is I now have a keyboard of 8 notes, and these 3 bottom ones here, and they will make a different sound depending on which one of these pads you push, and also if you push more than one of them. So let's just play a little bit here just to demonstrate. Now, another thing I wanted to do as well, which turns out to be a lot more difficult than doing what I just showed you now, is to also include pitch bend. So if you push down a note and you push a note to the left or the right of it at the same time, it pitch bends up or down. Of course, because of the way this system works now, if I push some additional notes here, it behaves slightly differently. The pitch bend works perfectly the way I intended, as long as it's a neighboring note that is being pushed. Once you push something further down, it might think that you're pushing something. Oh, it's a strange effect there. Yeah. Yeah, it actually makes quite a nice sound as well, I think, this patch. Okay, so let's have a little look at how I've done this. Right, so where do we start? First of all, the actual keyboard itself is probably a good place to start. So each of these is a push button switch, and we have set them to momentary. So So what I've done is I created 8 switches and I basically just copied them twice so that I have a set of the same color, so it's nice and easy to see which one belong together, even though, of course, obviously, if they're in the same column, then they are. Okay, so these are all push button switches, all momentary switches, and now the way I wanted this to work, of course, importantly, is that the first button, or the first one you push, is the one that defines the note value. So if you push one button and I push any other button, the note value of the original note should not change, except for the pitch bend function, of course. But the base note for the pitch bend is still the one you push down first. And any other note values that might be on the other pads do not stack with the frequency that is set in the oscillator, and that's quite important. So technically only one of these pads sends its note value to the oscillator. That is one of the first things I sorted out. Secondly, of course, when you push more than one of the same note, they also should not stack as well. So the way I've done this is I've thought about it as a grid. So I've taken each of these columns and connected them up to, so first column is connected to one value module, the second column is connected to another value module, etc. And that way, when any of the notes in that column, or any of the pads in that column are pushed, that value module gets a value of 1, regardless of whether it's 1, 2, or 3 of that column. So those are here. These are the 8 value modules that correspond to each of these columns. For the modulation part, I've also done the same principle there. So each of the rows connect to their own value module. So that top row here has one particular modulation that is common to all of them, and the same for the second and third rows, and they are slightly different. And I've used them to adjust a filter, both the cutoff frequency for a low pass filter and the Q rating, that is the resonance of the filter. Of course, technically you can use this as a modulation source for absolutely anything. So that's just an example of something you might do. And of course, there are some things in this patch now that don't have to be exactly the way I've done it. There are other ways to do the same thing, and also because of the way I constructed the patch, I think there are some things that might be possible to be done in a slightly different way, because I just went with what I could think of first, and then I didn't change it later. But I've sort of tried to make it as relatively simple as possible for what I'm trying to achieve. So, and in addition to having one value module for each column and for each row, I also made one value module that is connected to all the patches. So when I have any other module that needs to register if any of the patches have been pushed, then there is a value module, and that's the one right here actually, that is connected to all of them. And it will, I'll just also show one of these here. So let's just take a random one, number 2 there. That's the column number 2, and that's the one there. Challenge number 1 was to make sure that the patch registers when there is no note playing and when there is a note playing, because it's relevant to the note value that is sent out. So, and I believe I have most of the workings of that on this page here right now. So you see what happens when I push a note. Lots of things here light up, and when I push additional notes, you see it's the same pattern of lights that light up. When I release this note, then it goes back to a different state. So these things, they are the ones that register whether a note is played or not. I'll just go through what I've got here. So I've got a sample and hold, and that is the basis for lots of things now in this patch. I think this is my main sample and hold that I use for so many things. I've got a comparator. I've got a trigger, and I've got a multiplier. Let's just have a little look at how these things are patched up now. So this is the value module that is set to all the patches, all the pads rather, I should say. And you see this is connected to the comparator negative input, and it also is connected to the multiplier CV input. Now a comparator works by having a value on the first pad. It's got two inputs. It's called a positive input and a negative input. If the value in the positive input is equal to or greater than the value in the negative input, then it outputs a value of 1. So, and now the negative input here is the value that is from all the pads. So whenever you push any of these pads, this comparator gets a negative input of 1, which means that the only way it will give out a value of 1 is if the positive input is also 1. But what is the positive input? Let's have a look. It is connected to nothing. The positive input of this pad is actually just 0. So when the value from the all buttons value module is 0, which means no buttons have been pushed, the negative input is 0, and that means the output from this comparator is 1. So that this is the way to, so when no buttons are pushed, it is 1. When any button is pushed, it is 0. Very important. Okay. So, and this output from this comparator is connected to two places, to the multiplier and to the trigger. The way a trigger works is every time it gets an increase in value on the input, it will go high, and it will output a value that actually, I think it sort of goes up quite quickly, and it goes down a little bit slower. I'm not sure how long it lasts for, but it is long enough to trigger things. So, which means that this trigger will get triggered by this comparator when the keyboard is released. You see it sends out a little flash of light there as it goes high, and then it goes down again. And this trigger is connected to the sample and hold trigger. Now, the way a sample and hold works is it has an input, it has a trigger, and an output, and the way it works is whatever is patched to the input, it can be a changing value, a dynamic value, a static value, something that is just sent over to the sample and hold, but it does not matter what's at the input until it gets a trigger input. When it gets a trigger input, it will output a value that is identical to the input at that very moment. And the output will stay the same, that's why it's called hold, until it gets a new trigger. So when it gets a trigger, it does a sample from this input, and it holds it at the output. So this is triggered by this trigger module over here. So when the keyboard is released, it sends a trigger to the sample and hold and triggers it, and also it is connected to the multiplier here. Now the multiplier is connected to the all keys value module, so that means it takes this value here and multiplies it by the output from the comparator. Now this is a bit interesting. So And this just happens to work. I wasn't sure if this was going to work, but so when no keys are pushed, the comparator gets an output of 1. When any key is pushed, this value module gets an output of 1, and this goes to 0. But if you multiply the outputs of these two together here, they actually create an output value of 1 long enough to create a trigger for the sample and hold. So it's a fraction of a second. You can't actually see it at all. It doesn't light up, but it is enough that it triggers the sample and hold. And so that means that when you push any key, the sample and hold is triggered. When you release all the keys, when there are no keys held anymore, the sample and hold is triggered. So where does the sample and hold get its input from? That is an interesting story in itself. It gets it from these value modules, which I mentioned earlier. These are the values from the columns. So the idea is that the sample and hold will get an input indicating which of these notes is the one that is active. And that is the only note value that will be played. So how does the sample and hold get to know which note is played? Because these are only connected to value modules, which means they all have a value of 1 when a note is played. So if I push any of these keys now, that column's value module will give an output of 1. And that is the one that is connected to the sample and hold. The way I've done it is I've used connection strength. I'll just move this actually to the next page now. So we have, just to show you, so this is connected up to all these 8 modules, each corresponding to one column, to one note value on the keyboard. And if we have a look at the connection list, we can see it has a connection strength of 22.2 for the first module, 33.3, 44.4, 55.5, 66.7, etc. Now, the reason I landed on these particular values is to do with how I did it first time, because I was thinking that I would use a switch to determine which note was being played by the oscillator, and also wanted an off stage for the switch. So I was thinking I would use a 9-channel switch. So I have 8 notes, but I was thinking 9 channels. And channel 1 would be off, and channel 2 would be the first note, etc., up to channel 9. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if you take a switch, the way a switch works is that you take the number of channels, you take the value of 0 to 1, and you divide it equally between the number of channels, and that gives you the value that needs to be sent to the switch. It's input, it's channel selector input. This is a 9-channel switch here. And if that gets a value between 0 and 11.1 for a 9-channel switch, it will select channel 1. If it gets between 11.1 or 11.11 rather, and 22.22, it will select channel 2, etc., etc. So these note values, I was intending them to be sent to the sample and hold. The sample and hold would then be sent to the switch to select which note was being played. And I intended to have one channel that was an off stage. But I did change it when I was patching a little bit on it last time. And now I'm actually technically only using 8 of the channels. But I'm keeping these numbers because they are faster and easier to patch up. And they're easier to remember. For instance, if you divide by 8, you get numbers that are much harder to remember. If you divide by 9, then you get these nice, easy numbers, 11.1, 12, or 22.2, 33.3, etc. So I'm using those. So technically, I've got a redundant channel, but it makes it easier to work with. Right, so So I might as well just go with the flow now and say, so the sample and hold, the output is then sent to the channel selector here on this page. And this is the page that deals with the note values mainly that is being sent to the oscillator. So we have 8 value modules here that are used to define the note values of the keyboard. So we have this one here is for the first key, second key, third key, fourth key, etc. So I've set this to and of course with value modules, you can use the encoder and push it. It will start like this. Oh, sorry. It will start like this, and then you push the encoder once, and then you get note values. And these note values are then sent on to this switch. So I'm keeping channel. This is an in switch, which means that you have a certain number of channels that you define from 1 to 16, and you have a certain number of inputs for an in switch. So this one has 9 inputs, and the channel selector, which is connected to the sample and hold, is then gets a value, the value that is sent to that channel, or that is selected locally in the module, is the one that determines which of these inputs is the only one that is sent to the output. So the output then is then sent onwards, and not directly to the oscillator, but I'll get back to that. So well, I don't think it's directly to the oscillator, is it? No, it goes via something else first. But so each of these note values, then the definition of the keyboard, as it were, is being sent to 8 of these switches. Which one is not in use at the moment? It was intended to be used for an off stage, but I got into trouble when I did that with how what happened when I released the keys on the keyboard. So and this value in turn is sent to a sample and hold, and that is triggered by a delay. And the reason it's triggered by a delay is because I had some strange artifacts that happened. So, and the delay is triggered by a trigger input. So normally you would have been able to do this in many contexts. You would be able to do this without going through all that stuff. You could have just sent the frequency now to the oscillator, and that would have been fine. But because there are so many things happening here and long strings of events, I found that adding a delay to the oscillator and then sending that to the sending a delay from the note value from the switch, and then sending that to the sample and hold, and then to the oscillator here, was the one that worked the best. And that is triggered by, let's find out, it's triggered by this module here, which is the same multiplier that, if you remember from a few moments ago, is the one that determines, that is triggered exactly when you go from a state of a note being off to note being on, is when it is triggered. So that is the mechanism of how the keys create their notes and how they are defined as frequencies in the oscillator by going through this value, these value modules and the switch. And also the frequency is then sent to the oscillator via a delay and sample and hold. The reason for the sample and hold is that, by the way, yes, just to be clear on that, it's a sample and hold because when you release the key, this switch will go back to 1, which is not a note value, it's just the lowest, which is a note value, but it's the lowest value, it's just an A0. And I wanted to avoid getting the A0 played in between other notes, and so to do that, it now uses a sample and hold, so it only changes the note value in the oscillator when you push a new key, when no other key has recently been pushed. So when all the notes are off and you push a new one, that's the note value that is sent to the oscillator. If you then push additional keys, the pitch bend will be activated, but the note value will not be sent to the oscillator because it's just the first trigger that is sent. So I hope that is clear. Now, the next bit is the one that was actually the most tricky by far to do, and that is the pitch bend. Now, this first bit is actually rather easy. I'll just move this out of the way now before I start explaining the pitch bend. So I'll just move these modules over to page 2. The all module, I think we might be needing that a little bit for the pitch bend as well, and also we will be needing the sample and hold, because that is actually one of those things that I used for everything in this patch. The all module, the one that I call it the all value, the all module, the one that takes the input from every single of the keys. Now, this is the pitch bend routine, and maybe it's actually easier for me to show this if I stay on this page, perhaps, and if I move some of the other things over here. Let's just see now. That's not going to work, is it? Yes, maybe if I move these things around a little bit, and then I'll just move these over here as well. Okay, so now I've got most of the things moved over here. Now there is a little trick when you are patching up on the Zoia and you are going between several pages, is that the modules you're working on, you want to put them on one page and then you will move them somewhere else afterwards. And also when you're trying to so for instance, when I've been working on the different things to do with the keys now, I will have had all these modules available to me on the same page. But when I was designing this patch, I actually only used 2 rows of keys rather than 3. And so there's a little bit less space here now, and I will actually need a little bit more, as you can see, for the pitch bend control. So I will actually I will move some of the keys over in this corner here, because now it's not important to have all the rows. So I'm going to just take some here in the middle, so it's easy to see where they belong. So I'm going to do that one there, this one there. So now I've got a few keys right here in the corner now. So, because now you can see, oh, I need 3, of course. I need to be able to show you bending both up and down. Okay, so now we got 1, and we can show bending up, and we can show bending down. Right. Now, this became a little bit more complicated than I thought it would be. Yeah, let's make sure it still works now. Okay. Right, so the way this works, to see if I can find the right order of things here now. So we got our sample and hold here. That's the one that is used for both the note values and also for the pitch bend now. So when we push a key here, you can see that a few things happen on this page here. You got this one here, that is the one that is the all value module. I'll just move that up there as well. So these are the ones that are used for both, and everything really. did I not use this for the... It looks like I didn't use the all value module actually for this. No, I didn't use the all value module for the inversion, so I'll just move that away so it doesn't distract us. Right, so what have we got here? We got a multiplier, we got an inverter, a comparator, a value module, an inverter, a value module, a value module, and a multiplier, an inverter, and a slew limiter. Quite a lot of stuff going on right here. What we have to do in order to create the pitch bend is we have to determine whether the key that is being pushed additionally to the normal key is higher or lower. And once we've done that, we have to then establish what kind of, how much we are bending the pitch by, and then how fast or slow that is done. So that is these last three modules here. But where do these values come from? A good start, actually, I think I might actually draw you a little picture now to show how I was thinking when I did this. So if I get a little bit more light perhaps over here, like so. I'll just get a big pen here. So now we know we have our note values that we use when we play now, and we know that they are 22.2, 33.3, 44.4, etc. And so when you play a certain note, you have the sample and hold will give out one of these values until a new note is played. That is to say, it will give out these values, and then it will go to 0 when no notes are played, and then it will go to another value only when another note is played. So let's say, for example, we are playing the fourth note, so that is a 55.55. Let's just say 55.5, just for simplicity's sake. Now, when we have these modules trying to establish a pitch bend, you have to take the values from all the columns. So all of these, so as I showed you earlier, got the page here with just the value modules for all the columns, and these now are also used to determine which of the columns are being played in addition to the main one. So in the inversion module here, we have to read all of the columns, which means that the columns that will register for the pitch bend is the one that is being played, and then one that is higher or lower than the one that is being played, which means we have three different possibilities. So either the value that comes from that module to this routine is either 55.5 now, if we go with our example and we play the fourth note, or it is 55 plus 5 plus the note above, so that is 55 plus 0.5 plus 66 plus 6, or it is 44.4 plus 55.5. So if you had added those together, those are the options. So you have those three different possibilities. Now, the only way to find out then what is going on is to start by subtracting the note that is being played. So if we subtract 55.5 from all of these, we get 44.4, 0, and 66.6. Which sounds useful, maybe, but still that is not really helping us, because we need to find out if these are higher or lower than this value. And the way I've done that is by subtracting 55.5 again. So if the note value here isn't 0, I subtract 55.5 from this and 55.5 from this, and then we get minus 11.1 or plus 11.1. And then we also have the 0, of course, that we've carried on from up there. And now we have a few numbers we can work with. So that means when you have a negative number, it is going to be a pitch bend down. If it's a positive number, it's a pitch bend up, and if it's a 0, it stays the same. So that is the principle of it, and I'll see if I can show you now how I did that. So the sample and hold, of course, is triggered when we push any of these, and also you see when we push just one of these now, this one here flashes up. That is in CV inverter. So this is the module that is used to subtract the value of the note that we are playing. You see, this is connected to the sample and hold. So whatever note value is played as defined by the values that are sent to the sample and hold is then being put into an inverter and turned into a negative number. That negative number is sent to two places. It's sent to a comparator, and it is sent to a value module. Now this comparator here gets this as its positive input. So now if you play a 55.5 value note, if that is the fourth note, this will again get a minus 55.5 or minus 0.555 really at its positive input. So let's see. So the negative input of this one is 0.0001. That is just to make sure that if it gets a value of 0, it'll still show as a low value out. Okay. Now the inverter, as you saw, it also sent its value to a value module over here. The reason I'm not sending the inverted value twice to a single module is because it will go below, potentially go below -1. And if it goes below -1, it'll be rounded up to 1. So it's very important to do this in separate stages so that none of the values we need for the calculation actually go outside of 1 or -1, because that is the range used by the Zoia. So the inverter gets an output of minus whatever note value is being played, let's say minus 55.5, sends it to this value module, and it sends it to the positive input of the comparator. This value module here, which gets the negative value from the note that is being played, also gets a positive value from the note that is being pushed. So this one is connected to all of these columns. So in our example now, if we play a 55.5, let's just say this is 55.5 value now, and we push the note next to it, this value module here gets minus the value of the note that is being played, but it also gets the values of all these notes that are being pushed. So if you push it once, you get a value of 55.5, but you also get minus 55.5 from the inverter. So that means it ends up as being 0. But once you add another note, this one now is 55.5 minus 55.5 plus 44.4 because it's a note below, or it is plus 66 plus 6 because it is a note above, which means now this output here is either 44 plus 4, 44.4, sorry, or 66.6. And that is then sent to the positive value here, in addition to the minus 55.5 again. So that means if now this value out here is 44.4 and it gets minus 55.5, it ends up being minus 11.1. Or if it is the note above and it gets a 66.6, you get 66.6 minus 55.5, and the positive input is 11.1 above 0, and it is above 0.0001, and this one gets an output of 1. I hope that is clear. It's a little bit convoluted, but the point is that when you go higher, this then is activated. So what about lower? Now this is where I thought I would be able to get by just using very easy comparators and things, but it did not work out so well. So you see this value here also sends its output to this comparator. Positive input again. But there is a difference. Now let's see. If you see, this one gets triggered. This one does not have the input from the negative input. So this one goes high as long as there is a value higher than 0 on this value module. So that means this one is triggered if it is lower or higher. So if we go higher, this one is triggered, and we want the lower one to be triggered when this one is high and this one is not triggered. So we want this to be, so this is where we get into the binary logic, and of course I made a separate episode about that, and I'll put a link to that here. So if you want to understand how the binary logic works, you can go there and have a look. So what I want to do is I want to take the value from this comparator, which only triggers when you go higher, and I want to move it into a not function. I want to get the inverse of this. When this one is low, I want the inverse to be high. And when it goes high, when it is triggered, when it is on, I want the other value to go low. So in order to do that, I create a not gate by moving it into an inverter. So basically, if this one now is 1, it will get -1 here at the output. And this is then moved into a multiplier module, because this is a NOT gate, but I also want after the NOT gate, I want it to be an AND gate, because I want to get the inverse of this. If that happens, if this is off and this is on, I want that to trigger that the pitch bend goes down. So in order to do that, I take the inverse of this comparator via this inverter module into a multiplier, and I have to add 1. So if this goes high, this becomes 1, this becomes -1, and it goes down there and it becomes -1, but you add a 1, so it now is 0. And if you multiply by 0, you get 0. But if this one is off, you will get 0 plus 1. So then you get 1 here if this is off, and you get 0 if it is on. So if this one is on, you get 0. If this one is off, you get 1 in the multiplier. And then you multiply that by the other comparator, which always is on when you push something to the side of the main note. So that means that when you now push lower, you get 1 times 1 equals 1 in this multiplier. If you push higher, you get 0 times 1 equals 0. So that means that this number here, this 1, shows us that now you have a situation where you want a pitch bend down. So this comparator up here shows us a pitch bend up. This one shows us it's supposed to be a pitch bend down. And that is in turn connected to an inverter because it's a pitch bend down, which means that has to be used to create a negative pitch change instead of a positive one. So see these two here, the one that shows the pitch bend up and the one that shows the pitch bend down, inverted, are both connected to the same multiplier here. So that means when you do a pitch bend up, when you do a pitch bend up, it is now multiplied by 1. If you do a pitch bend down, it is multiplied by -1. And the second part of this multiplier is the volume module that I mentioned in the beginning, which is the one that defines the pitch bend amount. So now it is set to E1, which means that if you do a pitch bend down, this is -1 times the value of the note pitch change. So it will bend it downwards. So it's a -E5. Or if it's a pitch bend up, it gets 1 times E5, note value, E1, and it will pitch bend up. I hope that is clear. It is a little bit convoluted and possibly not the only way to do it, but I was fiddling around with many other options, and this is the one that worked the best and most consistently for me, and that also didn't require strange connection values to work. So it may seem a little bit much, but it is reliable. So, and the multiplier output here is then sent, so that is now the value that is meant to be the pitch bend amount. So it's from the pitch bend amount times up or down, and then that goes to a slew limiter. So that is the speed of the change. So because I don't want the pitch bend to be instant, I want it to be gradual. This value is sent to a slew limiter that slows down the change from one value to another by the slew rate. And I'm not sure if that rate is meant to be for the whole range from 0 to 1, but I still haven't actually looked into that. But you can adjust it to taste, really, which is what I do. And the output of that is then sent to, if I can find it now, the oscillator frequency input. So the only two things that are connected to the frequency input now is the value from the slew limiter, and also from the, where are we now? From the sample and hold that is connected to the in switch, which is the one that selects the base note value, which is then in turn triggered by the sample and hold that is controlled by which note you hit first. I think that is all of the explanation that needs to be done, really, and I know this is a little bit convoluted, potentially, because it is such a complex patch. I'll just move these notes back, where they belong now, before I forget. And then if you go to the actual sound production page here, let's just go through the other things here. So we have the oscillator here. There's a little bit of an offset there as well, I see. And then it goes into VCA. And the output from the VCA goes into a state variable filter, which is controlled by these three value modules here, actually. So if you look at these value modules here, this is... Now these three, I did mention them earlier, but I didn't actually show them to you. Remember I said that for each of the columns on the keyboard, I also had a value module for each of those. And these are the three. So this is the top column, the top row, rather, of the keyboard. This is the middle row, and this is the bottom row. So when you push any button on the top row, this one will be triggered. Any button in the middle row, this one is triggered. Any button on the bottom row, this one is triggered. And these ones are connected to the filter, and they are connected to both the frequency and the resonance. And if you look at these now, you see they all have slightly different, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one, different values. And also there is a base value as well that is patched into the, is that? No, yeah, this. This is the offset value that is in the filter itself that I just set to make it sound all right, basically. And after the filter, the sound goes to a whole reverb, and the output from the whole reverb goes to the audio output. And that, in a really, really large nutshell, I suppose, is how this thing works. So I'm just going to play you a little bit now. Right, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and please, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, please ask. It is a little bit convoluted to explain these things, but I do hope that it was clear enough. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. I might not be able to answer them that well because, yeah, I just... it was such a complicated thing to patch up. That inversion, not the inversion thing, but the pitch bend thing became so much more complex than I thought it needed to be. And there might be a really simple way to do it that works equally well, but that is just the one that I ended up on first that worked. Or second, it's not the first version actually, but it's the first version that I actually liked. And so if you enjoyed this, if you find it useful, if there are any other techniques or ways of working that you found that you might be able to use in your own patches, please also let me know. Please like, share, subscribe, join me on Patreon, all those things that people do on YouTube these days. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time in whatever video will be next. This has been quite a hard slog to actually do this video, because it was when I was making this patch that my shift button stopped working, and then I had to spend a few days doing that. And when I got back to the patch, I'd forgotten a lot of the things that I'd been doing, and I was trying to make sense of it all. And then I tried to make a video, and that didn't work out well because I had to change something again. So I hope this is finally found you and you found it useful. So yeah. Of course, another thing about this patch, there's nothing in the way that you might actually use 5 keys here, or five rows for this keyboard. And of course, you just add new modules for the rows. You just connect up the new keys on top here with the value modules for the columns, and you can have 5 different modulations. Indeed, you can have a kind of almost like an XY pad, like a chaos pad thing, using the grid here, using the same kind of principle. Now, you may have heard this patch is not perfect. The release note, the released values and things, there's some strange things going on there that's not entirely intended, but I think it actually sounds quite nice. And I do believe this also looks quite nice on an oscilloscope. I'll be quite excited to see how that looks when I check it out afterwards. So thanks again for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye bye.